got that letter saying you're in the path, right? Saying they wanted to survey your property?
Um, it was as with a lot of people, it was more of like a much more confusing sort of process. I came back from vacation and got a card in my door to call the land agent, to call Doyle, and I also got an email from my neighbor across the road saying they had bad news for me, that it had already been on their property, um, but it had been shifted on their property, which meant it would now go across mine. And the new route went, the construction zone extended into my kid's bedroom, and they were gonna, like, basically they put it right through my front yard, my kid's playset, all the hundreds of trees I'd planted, all my landscaping. It was just they're just gonna, it was like the worst possible. I own 105 acres, and they chose to put it on the absolute worst place on the land that they could find, which I'm
So,
sure was a negotiating ploy.
so in retrospect, what would you tell somebody in another community who found themselves in a similar position? What did you do, and then what do you think you might have done differently?
Um, as I said, I was really late in the game, and so I knew that pretty soon all the other routes were going to be set, and I would have very little ability to have any chance to even move it within my own property, much less get it off my property. And so I moved, felt like I needed to move fast, and try to get a hold of someone with some routing authority within Dominion, and my neighbors who had alerted me to the route change. They already had an attorney, and so they referred me to him. And because time was short and I felt under pressure, I went with him without. I didn't explore other options, and just in order to try to get someone within Dominion to get their ear, so I could get a route change potentially. In hindsight, well, most people probably aren't going to be as late in the game as I was. I think that this, if you, most people have more time than they think, and should definitely use that time to interview in person multiple attorneys, and talk to actual people who have been affected in the past on pipelines directly, and not. I would not recommend going off of web reviews or necessarily even just recommended lists by advocacy groups. I think it's much better to get a hold of. I mean, if you could find a trusted attorney that practices in other fields, like a family attorney or someone like that, you could ask them. But even better, try to get a hold of an advocacy group that could connect you with landowners who had used various attorneys, and get a sense. I would also advise people to really take their time and get a sense of they don't want to hire someone that is just seems like they're trying to sell them something, because it's not. The person you want to hire is not going to be someone that's trying to sell you something that you don't want to buy. You shouldn't feel like you're getting sold a used car. You shouldn't feel like someone's trying to, like, get your vote, a slick politician. It should be someone. This guy really knows his stuff. He's told me, he's made his pitch in a professional, articulate way, and to ask lots and lots of questions. And if those questions aren't answered clearly and concisely, and even better, to try to get those answers in writing, because if someone will only answer your questions orally, and that for me, that's kind of a red flag. If an attorney's not willing to put it in writing, there might be a reason for that. So those are some of the lessons that I learned. Take your time. It's one of the most important decisions you'll ever make. So.
Some interviewees have said that they hired attorneys to represent them in negotiations with Dominion's land agents. Some hired attorneys to help them resist surveys. What would you say to the notion of resisting a survey?
I think it is. I mean, it really depends on what stage you are in the game. I think I was late enough that I didn't do a whole lot of resistance, because it was things had moved past the point where it was it was in my interest. It was almost definitely going to be on my land if the project went through, and so some degree of cooperation to not have the vindictive route through my house was in my interest. I was in a unique position. Like other people, when they're early in the process, I don't think most pipelines like move around as crazily as this one did, and particularly not for my particular chunk of it, where it's going to be 25 miles away, and then all of a sudden it's down the road, and just like that people have more time. I think I haven't reviewed the process. I mean, like the timeline, but my assumption is that most people would have time to hire someone, and I think it is in their interest to hire an attorney. I would most eminent, if not all eminent domain attorneys, work on a contingency fee basis. There are some general attorneys or some situations where I think it's in the landowner's interest to potentially do a more of an hourly arrangement, like for the resisting survey, just because it may be something in the end that where they'll end up paying the attorney less. It seems like a lot of out-of-pocket money, but by getting signed up that early on, they can end up paying a much bigger chunk of change if the pipeline goes through. They're going to get compensated less for their loss. If I was in that situation, I know some other landowners. I know of a particular attorney in Charlottesville who did hourly representation of landowners resisting survey, and I think it's a wise move by those people. I would have done the same if I was in that situation.
Would it have been wise for Friends of Nelson started right after the announcement Dominion was made, and so they were kind of scrambling for what to do, and part of it was not knowing who was going to be on the route and trying to figure out through using GSI, whatever they could, or GIS, I'm sorry, and calling neighbors and going door to door in some cases and so on.
Yeah, no, I remember.
So we've interviewed at least one person one couple who said that their reaction was not to go to Friends of Nelson, but to listen to an attorney they trusted. And his opinion and his attitude was, this is a done deal, so get the best deal you can. And he advised them to find an eminent domain attorney. And from that point of view, it kind of worked because they were able to shift the line off of where it had originally been proposed to another portion far away from their house.
Yeah.
And that had a downstream effect that was beneficial to some of their neighbors, because otherwise it would have gone through their front yards. But in the early days, Friends of Nelson was getting asked by people for essentially legal opinions on what to do, and they didn't have any answers. They kept saying, "We're not attorneys. We can't tell you that." There was sentiment to try to resist the surveys, and so that, I'm sure, got conveyed to people who were asking for advice. So Ron has come up with this idea of, in the early days, once a group organizes to oppose a pipeline, hire an attorney to give general advice on what the regulatory process is like, and what eminent domain means, and what your options are. Tell me why that's a good or bad idea.
No, I think that's a great idea for a number of reasons. I mean, for one, it's something that, I mean, it's what you just said. You can educate people as to where they are in the process, what's to come, and it allows people. One of the things I would advise to future landowners is, I mean, just I couldn't find anywhere written how the whole Dominion or how the pipeline company process works, where there's the initial offer is going to be an extreme lowball offer. And so for landowners to know that, and to know that there's going to be counter offers and counter offers back and forth, that's just part of the process. Even without an attorney, I think that landowners, if they can consult with an attorney and they can say, yeah, this pipeline's early in the process. You have some time. If they're consulting with someone who's not going to take a contingency hit based on their own advice, and a good attorney is supposed to ethically tell you this regardless, or an ethical attorney is supposed to tell you that. But if it's one that's working for the advocacy group, they can say, write a couple letters back and forth, get that number up higher, because they're just going to automatically double it or go 50% higher on each one, and then you can explore hiring a contingency fee attorney and just get your. I mean, the way that eminent domain attorneys work is they get 1/3 of whatever the last offer was, between the difference between the offer when they were hired and the final settlement offer. So if you can boost that number up a couple rounds by just saying I don't accept the offer and then wait a little bit, then the landowner in the end gets more money in their pocket if the pipeline goes through. And so what you're mentioning, the attorney that just works for the advocacy group and can supply advice that's not remotely affected by their own financial interests, I think would be very, very important and help people make decisions that would at least. I mean, it's going to be a horrible experience either way, but at the end of the day, at least they'll get more for their primary asset than they would have if they're losing a third of delta to who they're hiring. I think it also really helps with the advocacy group has more time and expertise to find an attorney who's very, very trustworthy, and that person can serve as a little bit of a gatekeeper to give advice as to what the good options out there are. And so I think that would be. I mean, obviously people don't have to take that advice, but I think that would be a very important tool for landowners to have some idea of, like, here's a list of 3 of my colleagues that I really trust, and so that sort of thing didn't exist when I was shopping around. I don't think it normally exists. But yeah, just for those reasons, as well as what you were mentioning, just people have questions right off the bat and just don't. It's confusing, and just having someone sit down and say, here's the general process that's about to happen, I think would help a lot.
How do you research an attorney?
That's the problem, is there's not really you can, it's not like looking for a restaurant on Yelp. There are some websites out there, but there's not many reviews for most attorneys, and you'll notice there's almost no negative reviews out there because an attorney can get negative reviews removed. So there's going to be, and a lot of the reviews are from colleagues. They're like, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And that said that the web is a horrible place to try to get an idea of what attorney to hire. That's like the personal recommendation by someone that you trust or someone that's been through the experience is huge. And then just like the meeting with numerous people and getting a sense of who you trust and who you think is just trying to get your money is really what you're left with.
Are there questions that you think a property owner should be asking of an attorney?
Yeah. I mean, they should, depending on what their goal is in the process, they should definitely be asking, get a sense of, if they want to fight it till the end, they should definitely talk with the attorney about their opinion about that, because matching up, there's financial incentives for an eminent domain attorney to settle early. I mean, they want to get the number up high enough. I mean, both potentially for the landowner as well as to get their own fee up higher. But for them, they don't want it to go all the way, because by far the greatest expenditure of legal time is going through litigation, and that almost never raises the number more. And so, if they get pushback, if they get a sense of this attorney doesn't think we have a chance, they don't want to do that, then that's probably not a good match for them. They're gonna get pressured into settling, and they may not want to settle. Although settlement may be the best thing for them in the long run. They might. The attorneys I ultimately hired did recommend that I settle, because they said if we go to court, you're gonna end up getting less and paying a lot more and having to slog through another couple years of hell. And I trust that they were telling me something that was in my interest, not just in theirs. But that's I would definitely ask that. I would try to get in writing from the attorney what happens if the pipeline's ultimately canceled. What happens if I choose to go with another attorney? Things like that. Like those are things that I didn't really consider in the contingency fee arrangement, which can cause you can be sued by your former attorney if you switch attorneys midstream. So and I guess I might actually ask, have you ever sued any of your clients, and if so, how many? That's a question I'll probably ask, and to get that answer in writing, I might ask, how many cases are you handling now? Do you have a cap on how many you will handle? What's your turnaround time on phone calls and emails, typically? Things like that. And if you get resistance and pushback and they get annoyed or huffy with you, then that's not the guy that you should go with, or girl, or lady, or man, gentleman, or so yeah, that's part of my list.
Have you, you know the name Carolyn Elephant?
Yeah.
We interviewed her
Mhm.
by Zoom.
Yeah.
She's very strong on the FERC regulatory process.
Yeah, she is. I talked with her at one point.
So why is that important to know what the regulatory process is and what FERC is all about? Because one of the things we're trying to advise other communities to do is learn as much as you can.
Yeah.
Because we were starting basically from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knew even what FERC was.
Yeah.
So why is it important to know what the regulatory process is all about?
I guess there's multiple layers to that. For my experience, was important to know about that, because that kind of defined the process and the timeline of where you were and how much time you had to negotiate, like where your window was for actually getting a route change. My personal experience with the FERC process was that I was an intervener. I did like 100 hours of filings almost with them, and it didn't really get me anything. But that might have partly been because I was late in the process. It's also FERC as it existed when I was dealing with it was very much a rubber stamp organization. A good friend of mine used to be high up in the SELC, and that was his characterization of FERC. It was just they're in the business of rubber stamping pipelines. They approved them all, and that kind of was my experience. There may have been a time when that's not the case, and hopefully going forward there'll be some reform. I think there is some of that afoot. So in the future, it may be something that the process actually serves its intended purpose, which is to give affected landowners a voice and be able to participate. For me, it just kind of felt like I was just throwing things into the wind. It was
For the uninformed, what's an intervener?
It's someone who signs up via the FERC website, and that enables you to file comments and in theory be involved in the process. It also allows you to get communications as to the status of the project directly from FERC. So I mean, it's useful to do even if you're not going to be listened to. And I think there were some instances of like where there were enough collective voices on some things where I think that FERC actually did put a little bit of pressure on Dominion. So, but on an individual level, and I think pipeline companies are sometimes a little concerned about doing things that are really egregious, because FERC might, if they put a bunch of things through people's houses or wells or cemeteries or whatever, then I think if they do enough of that, then there can be some buildup, and FERC can in theory apply a little bit of pressure. So I imagine there's some strength in numbers, but I don't feel like as an individual that there's anyone sitting there saying this is an injustice, like that this person needs a route change.
Is there anything having to do with legal standing by being an intervener?
Yeah, I mean, I've forgotten to be honest, I've forgotten a lot about that. I think I think there is. I'll have to defer to Carolyn on that.
Okay. Um, is there anything else that you think a community faced with this should know, given the fact that they're starting from a somewhat, anybody today is starting from a somewhat different place than we were 7 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I mean, things like what Friends of Nelson and other groups are doing to document what happened and what they learned. I don't think that was out there before, and if it was out there, it wasn't really readily available. It was just in some people's heads. You had to know someone to try to extract that out. So I'm hoping that people can get a hold of things like this and documentation and be able to learn from the success of groups like Friends of Nelson.
Yeah, Ron wants to do a kind of a booklet of steps.
Yeah, Joyce has mentioned that to me as well. I think that would be a phenomenal help to groups and landowners.
I see our video is more in the inspirational side of things.
Sure.
You know, you can fight this as a group and get to know your community better and try to stay unified through what could be a very, very long process.
Yeah.
So we're looking for, I mean, that's what video does best, I guess, is convey some kind of emotional thing that
Sure.
is sometimes hard to define, but at least our goal is to give people hope.
Yeah.
So how do you feel now, having gone through all this? And
I mean, I'm an attorney, and I felt very overwhelmed, and just like, yeah, it was one of the worst days of my life when I found out it was going through the land that I have is like my firstborn child. I love it with all my heart, and I had poured myself into it, and yeah, to have a private corporation come and say, no, we want this land and we're going to take it and we'll pay you peanuts for it on top of that. It feels so wrong on so many levels. So it was it was such a long, drawn out process too. The emotional roller coaster of watching it come closer and closer, and then it's on my land, and then it's on my house, and then I managed to get it moved, which was kind of like asking someone to please only cut off the arm of one of my kids rather than both legs or something like that. That was a horrible experience to have to sit there and grit your teeth and know that you needed to be nice and respectful and hope that this person would help you, and then to go from that to then the Fourth Circuit opinion and thinking it's on hold and might actually fail, and then the Supreme Court swings the other way, and then to have it canceled in the midst of COVID. Yeah, it was. I mean, I still feel exhilarated and just I never would have guessed. I thought it was a done deal in our regulatory and political environment. So I try to remind myself every day just to be very, very grateful that it ended up like it did.